afternoon, everybody. It's Debbie Evans here, and Rolo's also here, although he looks as if he might be about to fall asleep. Today we're going to review a chapter from Book 2, the Chilvester Passage, and this is chapter 14, and it's all about this little character, William Shakespeare. The floppy-haired boy was doing his homework. "Mum, why didn't Shakespeare write about dogs in his plays?" he asked, chewing on his pencil. I was pretending to be asleep, curled at his feet under the dining room table, but I raised an ear all the better to listen. "I think there were a couple of them mentioned in The Two Gentlemen of Verona," said the smiley lady, stirring the custard in the kitchen. "I had a friend who had to lend her greyhounds to a Stratford production one year," she continued. The floppy-haired boy went back to his homework. I thought about this. "Look, Mum, Rolo's doing clown eyes again." I had a vision of a chimney pop into my head. When I next saw Athelstan in the forest, I told him I'd like to go and meet William Shakespeare. "And why would you want to do that, I wonder?" he smiled. "But be warned, he doesn't like dogs." Via the usual means of time travel, I found myself in the middle of 17th century Stratford-on-Avon. I immediately saw a greyhound who reminded me of Degree, who I'd once met on Marlborough Common during a time-travelling adventure last year. "Excuse me," I said politely, once we'd sniffed each other in greeting. "Could you please show me the way to writer William Shakespeare's house?" "I should steer well clear if I were you. He doesn't care for dogs," the greyhound replied. I was beginning to feel a sense of foreboding, but I followed his directions, which took me along a winding cart track into a hamlet. I sneaked into a low-ceilinged thatched cottage and knew immediately I was in the right place. The chimney was smoking terribly, filling the cluttered cottage with the smell of wood smoke. A balding man sat at the wooden kitchen table, scratching away with a feather pen, making black spiders on the blank page. I hid under a sideboard and watched him fill sheet after sheet with spidery writing, pausing only occasionally to dip his quill in the fresh ink stored in a bottle in front of him. He was muttering to himself, and his body racked with coughing. I wasn't really surprised. The smoke in the room was quite thick and was pouring out of the fireplace. The writer didn't seem to notice. Suddenly the coughing man caught sight of me and threw his feather pen down with a curse and made a splot on the paper. "Now look what you've made me do. Get out, filthy cur." I kept close to the floor and sidled towards the door. He resumed his writing and mumbling, and I could hear, "Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears." "Excuse me, sir," I piped up. "That doesn't make sense." The great poet and playwright put down his quill carefully, placed both hands on the table and leant towards me. "How dare you criticise me? Don't you know who I am?" he thundered, and then added less thunderously, "What do you mean it doesn't make sense?" He broke off in a fit of coughing. Emboldened now that I had the great man's attention, I said, "You really should get that chimney seen to. There must be a blockage. Now, where was I? How can someone lend you their ears? You can't detach your ears. Sorry, it just doesn't work for me." "It's a figure of speech," he roared, waving his quill at me. "I suppose you don't like, but soft, what light through yonder window breaks, either." "Well, I don't understand that, if I'm honest. Why don't you just say the sun is shining?" "I'm not writing for dogs," he roared, suddenly pushing back his chair, which fell with a clatter onto the flagstone floor. Shakespeare was seized with another bout of smoke-induced coughing. I took a deep breath, it was smoke-free near the floor, and said, as calmly as I could, "It's just that your language is a bit flowery. School children have to study your plays and learn chunks of speech off by heart. The floppy-haired boy struggles, they all do." I could sense that I was only inflaming the situation. I decided to try a different tack. "Look," I said, trying to dig myself out of the hole, "I can help you clear the blockage in the chimney, But you'll have to put the fire out and we must wait for the flue to cool down. That could take some time. Shakespeare stood up, poured himself a drink from a pitcher into a pewter tankard and cut a hunk of bread and a wedge of cheese. He pushed some towards me, pouring water in a bowl and setting it at the other end of the table. There, he instructed, inviting me to sit up at the table on a stool. Now, look here, I don't care much for dogs. I rode to Small Park for a couple of greyhounds in the Two Gentlemen of Verona recently, but I didn't give them a significant part. I didn't think they were up to it. I'm a cat man myself. Have you seen these two? They sleep under my four-poster bed. I glanced over at the deep window ledge and saw a black cat he introduced as Othello and an angry hissing cat called Macbeth. The tone of his voice had changed when he talked about his cats. Because I was time travelling, I knew I would have to be polite to them, or, if at all possible, just ignore them. In reality, I wanted to chase the stupid smirks off their big, smug, furry faces. Both cats eyed me mistrustfully. I doubted they had any idea that they could inspire central characters in their master's later plays. So, Kerr, how do you propose we spend the time waiting for the chimney to cool? Maybe I could help you write a play. I looked up coyly, seizing the main chance, and did clown eyes at him. Well, it worked with the smiley lady and the floppy-haired boy. To my surprise, Shakespeare started laughing. His shoulders were heaving as he laughed, so much that tears ran down his face and into his beard. He staggered to the fireplace once he'd calmed down a bit, and upended a pitcher of water onto the hearth, dousing the flames. I followed him out into the courtyard, where he worked the handle of the water pump and filled another pitcher, and that too ended up in the fireplace. The hearth sizzled and the smoke in the room increased for a moment. Even the cats vacated the window ledge and went outside. When the smoke had cleared, we re-entered the room, and Shakespeare pushed the food platters aside, righted the ink pot on the table, taking a fresh piece of vellum to write upon. I've decided to humour you, Sirrah. What will be the subject of your play? I hadn't thought that far ahead. I put my head in my paws and thought for a moment. I tried to remember the plays the floppy-haired boy had talked about over the tea table when struggling with his English homework. How about The Merry Dogs of Marlborough? I said. The bearded face broke into a broad grin. He obviously liked that idea. And what's the plot going to be? Well, I thought you could write about me, one of your best-loved characters, that fat old man Falstaff, the one you wrote about in the history plays. I hoped the great man was impressed with my knowledge of his works. Whoa, let me stop you right there, Sirrah. Shakespeare banged his fist on the table. Falstaff died in one of my history plays, Henry V, I think it was, and anyway, I'm rather sorry I did write him out because he was a very popular character with the groundlings at the Globe. I keep getting booed since I killed him off. Then why don't you bring him back? I suggested. Don't be so silly, he sneered. I can't bring him back from the dead. So what other great ideas do you have for this play, young dog? Well, I haven't thought it out exactly, but I thought we'd set the scene in a lovely English garden and have some woodland folk in it. I have a couple of characters in mind, and maybe one of the human characters gets turned into a donkey. I'll play the lead, and then there's my girlfriend Chickpea. We could get the theme of mixed up love in it, of course, always a crowd pleaser. I was warming up. And I suppose you want me to call this farce Rolo and Chickpea, he bellowed. Shakespeare may have been snorting outwardly at my suggestions, but I could see him scratching away on the sheet of paper in front of him. The quill never stopped moving. He was going along with the ideas of the Merry Dogs of Marlborough, and in spite of all his sneering, I was sure he secretly liked the plot. I kept my end of the bargain. As soon as the chimney had cooled enough, I clambered up it, finding poreholes in the warm stonework. I think a dog had been up that chimney before. I doubt it had been one of those useless cats. I bumped into something spiky in the flue and then realised I'd found the cause of the smoke in the room. There was a rather large and empty bird's nest blocking the chimney. I head-butted it a few times and moved to one side to let the sticks, mud and straw fall into the sodden half below. I climbed a bit higher and knew the chimney was now clear. Satisfied my work was complete and that the fire would now draw properly, I scampered back down the chimney and landed in the hearth in a cloud of black dust and twigs. The cats sat washing themselves on the windowsill. They eyed me with disdain. I think the expression is like something the cat brought in. "Stay where you are," the playwright boomed as I sat blinking in a pool of soot which had blackened the rushes covering the floor. Without further ado, he picked me up by the scruff of my neck and marched me out at arm's length to the water pump, working the handle furiously to get the flow going and dousing me thoroughly to get rid of the soot, without any care to my well-being or comfort. "Thou art as dark as night," he muttered, and I thought that was actually quite good and said so. That earned me another dunking under the freezing water spout. He rubbed me dry with a towel, much more roughly than a smiley lady ever does, I might add. I put up with it. I could sense that the cats were still smirking on the windowsill. Shakespeare then reached for a taper, and lighting it in a tallow candle, he relit the fire. His face broke into a smile when the wood burned cleanly, and this time the smoke went up the chimney without any problem. He invited me to sit beside it on the cleaned rushes to dry off. After a few moments, I shook myself dry and then glanced over at the beginnings of the collaborative play on the table. I was very pleased with what I saw, a whole ream of paper. I asked the bard if he would put my name on it as co-author. Zounds! I was silenced by the inkpot whizzing past my ear and smashing behind me in the fireplace, splattering me with black dots. "Thou art a cheeky fellow, this is my play, I don't write with anyone." "I'll take that as a no then," I said, as I skittered towards the door. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer." "Thou art a spotty dog," he spluttered, and I thought to myself, that's quite good, I wonder if I'll get written into one of his plays. As I trotted down the garden path, I heard the unmistakable sound of the screwing up of paper and the ensuing crackle as the whole manuscript was consigned to the nicely burning fire. Black smoke from the chimney bore testimony to the fact that the merry dogs of Marlborough had just gone up in flames. I have to confess I was rather disappointed, as I thought I had some really good ideas there. At least I had my answer as to why there were no dogs in Shakespeare's plays. I nodded at Athelstan, who was smiling at me from his bark perch. I scampered home and squeezed under the rickety gate, up the garden steps and back through the trapdoor under the sink. When I got back into my basket in the kitchen, I failed to notice anything was amiss and fell into a deep sleep, dreaming of curtain calls and taking a bow on stage in the theatre. I would have to work on my bow. It wasn't until the next afternoon, when rolling on the floor with the floppy-haired boy, that he noticed. "Mum, come, look, Rolo's grown another black spot on his back." So that's the end of that chapter. Thank you very much for listening to us, and we'll be back again tomorrow afternoon at 3:15 on this Facebook page. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.